One of the most challenging areas of marketing is charity, where big ideas are rarely matched with big budgets. So in podcasting, how do you take on the best brands in the world and win? Let's find out.
Worldwide, brands are engaging with customers through podcasts. These are the stories behind outstanding brand podcasts, so you can listen, learn, and be inspired by the best. These are the award winners from DustPod.io.
Hi there, my name is Dusty Rhodes and you're welcome to Award Winners, the secrets behind award-winning brand podcasts. Childhood Cancer Ireland provides support for families who've gone through the worst of journeys. Their podcast has also been on a journey from humble beginnings to recognition at the Irish Podcast Awards, and it all started with one idea leading to one question.
Yeah, I had this idea, let's do a podcast. I didn't want to be too greedy because we were looking for favours and we were looking for people to volunteer their time. So I started asking for one. So luckily I found our host, who is Sinead O'Moore. Sinead really supported me with all the background stuff as to how to set it up, what platform to use, how to get it out there. So my job in all of this, I suppose, is to find the stories, find the guests, talk to them, make sure they're happy sharing their story.
Fionnuala Murphy is Childhood Cancer Ireland's communications manager. She used their Gold Ribbon Conversations podcast to both market the charity's work and provide support for families. Over the next few minutes, she'll share why she wanted a podcast, how it went from zero to hero, and how she measures success. To start, I wanted to know more about the difficulty that Fionnuala faces when marketing her message.
The childhood cancer space is quite fragmented. There's a number of different charities. So it can be difficult to differentiate yourself. And we do really try, I think all of us in working in the space try and not duplicate what's being done elsewhere. And we will try and make sure that parents are referred where they need to be referred. So if somebody else is providing something that we don't, we will make sure that parents are aware of that. And I suppose some of the supports that we offer would be to families who are out of treatment. And that can be quite a difficult message to get across, that, to a family that looks normal, in inverted commas, and looks well, are still struggling and need support.
So when you're talking to people and trying to get yourselves known, I'm presuming you're using all the usual social channels and social media and video and stuff like that. Where did you get the idea for a podcast, or where were you hoping that a podcast would help?
I suppose we started this in September 2021. So I was preparing for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which is in September. I love listening to podcasts. So I thought, is there something we can do as a one-off to connect with people? While I love podcasts, I didn't know anything about creating them or how to go about it. I suppose in my head, I thought this would be lovely as a series, but we were a charity working with a small budget. We didn't know what would be affordable or what was achievable for us. So I really hoped it would sit, in all the other tools that you mentioned in our social media and our other channels, as a tool to connect parents to each other, albeit not directly, but to allow those stories that were being shared through the podcast to connect with other parents, because there's an average of 369 children, adolescents and young adults diagnosed every year. So there's somebody coming to this every week, unfortunately, more than one person, coming to this every week for the first time. So I wanted something there to help them feel less alone, that would resonate with them, and that they could listen and kind of be nodding along going, yeah, that sounds familiar.
The stories people share on the podcast are often very personal, but story is also very powerful, and despite the circumstances, can also be very positive. It's this direct storytelling that makes podcasting so authentic. In this sample, Louise spoke about visiting hospital with her daughter, Leisha.
I'll never forget, we were in the waiting room in Crumlin, waiting to go in and see the oncologist at one point. I think it was about a year after she was diagnosed. We were just up there for a checkup, and there was a baby in a buggy, obviously waiting to, go through the same procedure, go in and see the doctor. And Leisha was whispering to me, and she was like, "Mom, that's so unfair." I was like, "What, Leisha?" And she was like, "That little baby, I think it was as a little girl, and she's like, she's only 3 or 4, like she'll never get to have a normal life, and look at her, she's so cute. And I was like, okay, but Alicia, look at you. And she said, yeah, but I had a normal life for 10 years, it's okay. And she just had this level of empathy.
Fionnuala, one of the things I've learned about this particular podcast series with the award winners is the importance of story. How important is people's stories to you when you're creating the podcast?
It's hugely important. I think it is such a valuable tool for people to be able to share their story, not just for the listeners' end, but for them as individuals to feel ownership over their story, to feel that they're able to advocate if their child has passed away, to feel that they can share them with the world and have everybody get to know who their child was, not just about their illness, but what did they like doing? The impact they made on the world. All of that, I think, is such a powerful tool for the many guests who, luckily for us, are willing to share their stories and trust us with their stories. And from the listener's point of view, that sense of connection is so important, and just feeling like you can resonate with maybe just one aspect of somebody's story. It may be multiple aspects if the stories are quite similar. But, even if people have the same diagnosis, their experiences will be very different because their family experience will be different. Where they live and their commute to the hospital will be different. And, there's so many different elements that impact on their experience.
So, Fionnuala, you said to yourself, I know it's going to work really well for us, a podcast, and you're used to listening to them. And you kind of went, we can do this. What kind of things surprised you when you got into the nitty gritty and you actually discovered what was involved?
I was lucky, I suppose, in that, I had this idea, let's do a podcast. I didn't want to be too greedy because we were looking for favours and we were looking for people to volunteer their time. So I started asking for one. Can we do a one-off? Can we send it out in a newsletter for September? So luckily I found our host, who is Sinead O'Moore, who at the time was working on a podcast called Every Mum, the podcast. And Sinead said, I'd love to send that, but I think there's a series in it. And I said, I think so too. I just didn't want to be too greedy. So from that, Sinead volunteered her time for the first series that we launched. And that was, I think, 5 episodes in September 2021. And we tried to cover as many aspects as we could. A parent who'd been bereaved, a medical expert. We spoke to a play specialist as well, just to try and give an overall flavour. So in terms of what was surprising, I suppose, Sinead really supported me with all the background stuff as to how to set it up, what platform to use, how to get it out there. So, we were very lucky to have her support in that because, I wouldn't have known where to start really on my own. So my job in all of this, I suppose, is to find the stories, find the guests, talk to them, make sure they're happy sharing their story. And then I pass them over to Sinead once they're at ease and they've shared their story with me as kind of a practice run for them to make sure that they're happy. So it's very much about, is it Brain Tumour Awareness Month, for example? What content might we have that would be suitable for that, or who can we look for to share their story?
And how did you find it when you were approaching people? Because it's such a personal thing and you're asking people to talk about it in a public forum. Did you find it hard to get people on board, or did people want to share?
No, I generally don't find it hard. There are times where you approach somebody and, I might know a little bit of their story, but you don't know all of it and you don't know where they're at right now. And it might not be the right time and they'll say no. And I would really rather that somebody said no rather than went ahead when they weren't fully comfortable. So there are times where, it doesn't work out or it's not the right time, and that's absolutely fine. But generally, no, I don't find it difficult to find guests. Sometimes they approach us, which is great. But most of the time it's me approaching them and explaining what it is that we're trying to achieve. A lot of the time they will have heard the podcast, so they understand where we're coming from. And I think the format works in that it's pre-recorded. It's at your leisure. You can pause if the doorbell rings. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. I think that really helps put people at ease. And, I have to give huge credit to our host, to Sinead, because she really helps to put people at ease. And I suppose, I have seen Sinead's confidence really grow throughout this podcast as well, because she started not having any experience of childhood cancer or of talking to families who'd been bereaved.
So between the two of you, I think another surprise that a lot of people get when they are approaching a podcast for the first time is the time that's involved. What kind of a time commitment did you have preparing an episode?
Yeah, and the time that was involved was probably one thing I didn't factor in. You think, this is going to be easy. I'll just find somebody and send them over to Sinead. But there is a lot of work. I suppose it's really important to us that people are at ease because we're asking them to share a very vulnerable time in their lives, be it currently or in the past. And they need time to consider it, time to think about it, time to think about how they want to frame things and how much they're willing to share. I don't want people to feel that they need to overshare if there's things that they prefer. There's sometimes, you're talking about children right now, maybe they're a 6-year-old, but because you're putting their story out there, they're going to be a 16-year-old, and people will have to think about, how do I, tell my child's story without giving away too much of them? It's your story as a parent, but it's also your child's story. So sometimes we'll have people who say, I don't want to share their diagnosis. And that's absolutely fine, because without sounding flippant, it's not always relevant. It's the story and the experience that's relevant. And of course, the diagnosis is hugely relevant, but not for what we're trying to achieve.
And do you find that getting those stories from people is helping the organisation and getting the message out?
I think it is, yeah, absolutely. So we will try and cover, as I said, a wide range of topics. So medical experts, parents who are currently going through this, parents of survivors, bereaved parents, survivors themselves, siblings, and all of that helps to shine a light on what the entire experience is like, not just that phase that, as I said, that we might be a bit more familiar with, of right in that middle of treatment when a child has lost their hair and things are really in chaos. It's so helpful for a family to hear that afterwards they were still struggling. It's so helpful for another family to hear that experience, that, I'm not losing my mind. It's not just us. Other people go through this. And what we have heard from listeners is that it's a trusted source of information. So they know that there's nothing shared that's, like going down a Google rabbit hole of talking about different treatments or anything like that. We wouldn't do that. It's very much about an individual or a family's experience. And then if we have medical experts on, again, it's not about talking about treatment per se. It's helpful. Sometimes it's about their experience in this, as maybe an oncologist saying, I take these experiences home with me. I don't just forget about it when I walk out the door. And it's so helpful for families to understand that the person who's looking after them is treating them like family, is really, has them at heart, and, takes them with them, and no matter what the outcome is.
As a matter of interest, did you record the interviews remotely or did you do them face to face?
No, they've all been done remotely. We started that way because when we started, I suppose, was still just post-COVID. It was September 2021. Sinead was also, I suppose, volunteering her time. At the time, she was on maternity leave. We are all, I suppose, working parents trying to... So I completely understand where people are coming from when we try and be as flexible as possible with our guests. So if that means that they can record on a Saturday or in the evening, we do that. And yet we've never moved to face because we have guests coming from all over. It really puts people at ease. They don't have to leave their house. They don't have to worry about finding somewhere to park or worrying about Google Maps or any of that. They can just find a quiet space, which can be hard enough at times as well. But find a quiet space. And, I say to people, make sure it's at a time where you're not going to be looking at the clock. You're not rushing out for a school collection because that's going to be on your mind. Just give yourself the time to have this conversation. And obviously the video, we record the video as well, just so that the guest and Sinead can see each other and have a proper conversation, but we don't release the video. We haven't yet done those clips where you can see part of their recording because I don't want people to feel under pressure.
still to come. Fionnuala shares the myriad of media and methods which she employed to successfully promote each episode, how she built her audience, and how she measures her success.
If you feel a brand podcast could work for you, here are 3 simple things you can do today to get started. 1. Visit our website to get more information and guides on how podcasts work specifically for brands, along with lots more examples of award-winning brand podcasts to inspire you. 2. You can call us with your questions and we're happy to help. 3. You could consider working with us, so you do all the fun stuff and we do everything else. Find that information on our website at dustpod.io.
So, Fionnuala, you've got the podcast idea, you've gotten together with your presenter, you've got some episodes, you're ready to go to the world and loudly proclaim that you have a podcast. How did you tell the world about it?
I suppose our main channels are social media, our website. We have a monthly newsletter. Social media would be the biggest platform, I suppose, that we use to tell people about the podcast. So we would release an audio clip on the day that the podcast comes out, and then I might try and do some engagement around it, depending on the topic. You know, have you experienced this? So put some questions out on social media, and that works quite well. People respond quite well to that and share with us what has resonated with them in a particular episode or something that they mightn't have felt comfortable talking about. So just for an example, we had an episode 2-3 weeks ago with a financial advisor who was also a parent of a child who's had cancer. And the topic of finance is one that's quite difficult for people to talk about, but it's something that almost every family struggles with during treatment. So in speaking to our financial advisor, you know, she was able to give some of that perspective, but also say, as a parent, I struggled with this too. So we were able to put out some questions during that episode. You know, is finance a difficult topic for you to talk about? Did you struggle financially? How long did it take to recover after, you know, treatment had ended? So those kind of questions help people to engage in a way that they're not able to maybe otherwise. But it does work quite well. And even for a bereavement episode, you know, to say what helped you with that episode? Is it helpful to hear these kind of stories? Is it difficult to talk about your grief? Just giving people the freedom to respond, and it can be anonymously. You know, I share the responses anonymously, but it just gives them an outlet to say, yeah, this is really difficult, and, you know, to let people know that.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience in building an audience? Because you have initial burst when you come onto the scene, and then kind of things get a bit normal, and then things grow. How do things go for you?
I suppose childhood cancer is a rare disease in Ireland. So this was always going to be a niche podcast. It's not something that everybody will want to listen to or need to listen to. And we understand that, and we're very happy if it reaches a core audience, I suppose, of families and survivors who are impacted by this. Even within that, people will not want to listen to certain episodes. They just can't. They're not emotionally ready. That's the reason I find the podcast a really appropriate forum for communicating with people, because it's not in your face. You can see, you can read what it's about, and you can decide, no, that's not for me right now. Maybe it will be in 6 months' time, but right now I'm not able for that. And you're not confronted with it unless you actively go in and choose to listen.
One thing a lot of podcasters talk about is pod fade, where kind of you get the first 4, 5, 6, 7 shows done, and then it kind of hits a little lull. How did you get through that, and how did things work afterwards?
Yeah, well, I suppose at the start we released episodes in September 2021, and then we didn't do anything until the following September, I think. So we weren't sure how we were going to proceed. What kind of budget did we have? At the time, Childhood Cancer Ireland didn't have any staff. We were working on a voluntary basis. So it was just really difficult to be consistent and to come up with a plan. But, you know, things have changed for the charity since then. We're growing. So we were able to put more resources into it and to make sure that we had budget to allow the podcast to grow. And we were able to apply for some grants and different funding to make sure that we could run it. So what we did then the following year was release seasons. So we had 4 seasons throughout the year of 5 episodes each. And we've changed that this year. We go out every 2 weeks, roughly. We'll take a break over the summer. the idea being, as I said earlier, families are coming to this, unfortunately, every week. So the podcast is there as a more consistent option for them, I suppose, if they're looking for support. If they've just been diagnosed and they're like, oh, where do I go? But yeah, the numbers and the listeners, I suppose, certainly, yeah, we did experience that lag, I suppose, because essentially the way we started, we were starting again. So we had released episodes, but there was no consistency. It wasn't in people's mind, oh, this is going to come out. So essentially we were starting again the second time. But from there, I think numbers have been relatively consistent. They certainly go up and down, and I can probably predict which episodes are going to be more popular and not, but they have remained relatively consistent. We'll have listeners, we'll have parents who say, I listen to every single episode, I can't get enough of it. And others who will dip in and out, as I said, depending on the topic and what resonates with them. And sometimes it's down to how much time I have to be able to promote it on social media. And if I haven't been as consistent with that, you'll see a correlation in the numbers.
Outside of the numbers, do you have any other way in your mind that you measure the success of the podcast?
I suppose I measure it even more than the numbers on the comments that we get from people. And it's not always written. Sometimes it can be in conversation. It will come up. We run focus groups with the parents as well to just make sure they have an avenue to inform the work that we're doing. And it will come up a lot at that, at those kind of groupings where people say, yeah, it's, it was great to have an avenue that I could find stories like mine.
What kind of future plans do you have for the podcast?
So we're always looking at is there anything that we haven't covered? Finance was one that we really wanted to cover this year, for example, to try and, initially it was to try and get a financial expert on. And I don't want it to turn into a webinar, or too instructional. So future plans, if we can keep going with an episode every 2 weeks, that would be fantastic. We would love to grow the audience and grow the number of people who are hearing about it, who are aware of it, whether they listen to every episode or not, as long as they know that it's there. And just keep going with as wide a range of guests as we can to cover all kinds of topics. We have an episode coming up in a couple of weeks with Laura Lynn, the Children's Hospice. So we try and talk to other charities as well. And their Assistant Director of Nursing came on. So again, we try and look at the calendar and see what's coming up and can we match content to that.
Just to wrap up, Fionnuala, can I ask for anybody else who's working in the same field as yourself, in a charity or in a kind of a voluntary organisation, or anybody who's working as a commercial marketer even, what advice would you have to anybody who is starting a podcast and wants to make an impact?
I think, as you just said there, it really is all about the stories. I knew, I suppose, going into this that we would always have stories, unfortunately, for the families that we're working with. There will always be stories there to tell. So for me, it was very much about the mechanics of it. How am I going to get this across the line? Who can work with us? Who knows what they're doing? Who can we trust? So for somebody else, I would say focus on the content. What is it that you want to say, and who is at your disposal, I suppose, to say that. And there might be people outside of the box as such, if you're thinking outside the box, that could fit that profile. I think once you get going and you start having that conversation, as you said, there are people who are on the outskirts of it who have a lot to say as well.
Well, listen, Fionnuala Murphy, I can't thank you enough for telling us about your podcast, and I wish you every continued success with Gold Ribbon Conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You can check out the podcast for yourself by searching for Gold Ribbon Conversations in your podcast app. There's also a direct link in the description area of this podcast on your player right now. And remember, if you're considering a podcast for your company or brand or organisation, you'll find some great resources on our website at dustpod.io. You can also schedule a call to chat about how a podcast could work for your brand specifically, or you could consider working with us yourself. So you do the fun stuff and we do everything else. Until our next Award Winners podcast from myself, Dusty Rhodes, thank you for listening.
The Award Winners is a DustPod production from dustpod.io.